Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine Maladian Kapitan, and now we're going to discuss my topic. It's all about test reliability. So when we talk about test reliability, it's all about the consistency of the test results when it's administered multiple times. So a test is considered reliable and it produces similar results when it's given to the same person or multiple terms or when different people administered the test. So now when we talk about test reliability, what comes on your mind? So test reliability, it's all about fundamental concept or research and statistical analysis. So that's why it's closely related for related test validity or some which is the accuracy of the test results. So a test can be reliable but not valid. So it's a vice versa, that for example a scale that consistency adds 10 pounds to person's actual weight is reliable but not valid. So that's why this is a test reliability example. So we proceed to number one. So when we tested on the same persons. So when we talks about retested, so this retested the same person, it talks about the same persons or the consistency of the scores. It's called test retest reliability. So this is a measure on how stable the score are over time. So yan yung sinasabi nila na same person kasi nire-retest na yung isang bagay, like for example score. So it's all about score when we talks about retested, nagre-retest sila ng score sa isang tao, like for example ganyan, which is for overtime. And to measure the test retest reliability at the same test and administered to a group of people twice. So ideally under similar conditions. So the scores from the two administrations are then correlated to determine if there is a trend and the similarity of results. So the correlations coefficient will indicate the stability of the scores. So yung dalawang score ng the same person, it's all about similar nila, similar na sa one and another. And that's why we need to retest reliability. It's important because it helps ensure that the data provided by the test, it's an accurate representation of the participants. So performance, it's an important concept. It many fields including social, behavioral, physical, biological, and medical science. And now we proceed to number two. So number two, when we're tested on the same measure. Kung kanina is same person, now the second is same measure. So when we talk about we're tested on the same measure, so test retest reliability measures that consistency of score between two sessions. It's a way to evaluate how stable a test is over time. So kanina is the same score, like called test retest reliability, and now the second is consistent scores between two sessions. So what do you think? So measures test retest reliability is you administer the same test to the same group of people twice, and then ideally under similar conditions. So the scores of administrations, it's all about perfect negative correlation, like ganyan, perfect positive correlation sa number 2. So test retest reliability, it's very important to ours like social, behavioral, ginagamit ito sa mga physical ganyan and biological and medical sciences. So for example of a color blindness test, the example is the color blindness test for trained pilots should have high test retest reliability because color blindness is a trait that doesn't change over time. So yan yung second example ng number 2, the same measure. So Number 3 is similarity of responses across items that measure the same characteristic. So when we talk about characteristic, or so another kind of reliability is internal consistency, which is the consistency of people responses across the items on a multiple item measure. In general, all the items on such measure are supposed to reflect the same underlying construct. So people's scores on those items should be correlated with each other. So this is the similarity of the 1 and 2. The when retested on the same person and when retested on the same measure. Tapos yung dalawa nila is yung similarity nila is yung across the item, like meron siyang same characteristic, but meron ding not difference, like iba-iba silang pagkakaano. So speaking of internal consistency, so kanina 'di ba yung naano natin kanina sa number 3 is similarity of two so speaking of internal consistency, it's all about like is a measure of how well a test or survey items correlate with each other and measure the same construct. So yan yung meaning ng internal consistency sa number 3 kanina, yung similarity. So meron pa siyang meaning. It's a measure of how well tests or survey items like correlated with each other and measure the same construct. And number 1, so the number of items. So the number of items is the more items a test has, the likelihood of reliability is high. The probability of obtaining consistent score is high because of the large pool of items. So when we talk about the number of items in a test, it's all about that can vary depending on the type of assessment, the grade level, and the subject. So the example is the average number of questionnaire. So like across all the grades and the subjects, the average number of questionnaire on a test is 10. Like it's for example, and then standard size assessment, class assessment, grade level. Yan yung example na number of items in a test. So number 2 is individual differences of participants. So every participant possesses characteristics that affect their performance in a test. So all of students like different participants, right? So meron iba't ibang mga differences yung mga students natin when it comes na pagtuturo na sa teaching. Meron tayong mga students na ma-out of place or hindi natin alam, like meron silang mga kakayahan na hindi pa nila na boost talaga because of a lack of, like, syempre nahihiya, ganyan. But individual difference of participants, it's all like, for example, is individual differences in participants are the differences in personal characteristic and experience between participants is an experiment, and those are differences of individual participants like age, sex, intelligence, personality, culture, and ethnicity. So individual differences are important for understanding behavior and shaping a person's sense of itself. So yan yung example ng individual differences and participants. So proceed tayo sa number 3 is external environment. So external environment like may include room temperature, noise level, depth of instructions, exposure to materials, and quality of instruction. So those are example of external environment. We have the collection of factors outside of a business that can affect these operations. So this we have these factors are the include of technological advancement, so regularity and legal changes, and then threats to its network, competition, market factors, economic factors, demographic factors, and last one is the environmental factors and political factor. This is the example of internal environment. So because external environment factors are unpredictable and hard to control, they can be more dangerous for an organization. So to effectively monitor and address these changes, so we have an organization should stay updated and implement appropriate policies and procedures. So yan yung example ng ating external environment. So the last is, what are the different ways to establish test reliability? So there are different ways in determining the reliability of a test. So first is variable you are measuring. So when we talk about variable you are measuring, what comes on your mind? Like, so variable you are measuring, it's all about an experiment. It's called the dependent variable. So the explanation, like example, is the experiment, and the independent variable is what the experimenter changes between groups, and the dependent variable is what is measured. For example, if a scientist wants to measure how water affects plant growth, the independent variable is the amount of water, and the dependent variable is the height of the plant. So gets? This is the example of variable you are measuring. And then second is type of test. So when we talk about type of test, what comes on your mind? Like mga types ng test, or sa school, anong mga type ng ano ng type ng test na like pinapagawa ng mga teachers natin, di ba? Di ba, a lot of type of tests. We have an example of here, multiple choice. We have an oral test. We have a matching type, fill in the blank, short answer, a written test, essay question, formal test, true or false, diagnostic test, essays, and internal test. This is an example of type of test. So, di ba, madaming type of test tayo na type of test, marami po talaga. And then second is number of version of a test. So when we talk about version of a test, what comes on your mind? Like, ano yung nasa isipan natin kapag tinatanong nila number of version of a test? So now this is the example of number version of a test. It's all about like parallel forms or alternate version. This is the one example of version of the test. Pre-test and post-test versions, draft versions, final versions, and plot versions. So, di ba? Pilot versions rather. So, di ba, a lot of examples of number of versions of a test. And that's all. Thank you.